Hey everybody, welcome to this edition of Retire with Style. I'm Alex. I'm here with Wade, and Wade is going to introduce a very special guest. Fire away, Wade.
Okay, thanks, Alex. And for listeners of this podcast, I assume everyone already knows who our guest is today. David Blanchett is one of the leading researchers in the area of retirement income planning in the world. So we're very happy to have him here. He is currently the managing director and head of retirement research at PGIM DC Solutions. He spent years at Morningstar. He's published over 100 articles, and I've always thought he effectively writes one research article per week, going on now for the past 10 years. So I got to imagine that 100 articles on his official bio is an underestimate. But he is Dr. David Blanchett with a PhD from Texas Tech University. And we're very happy to have you here, David, to talk about, in particular today, some of the amazing research that you did on the idea of retirement spending smile that fits very well into our discussion about retirement budgeting. That's our current story arc, as Alex likes to say.
Real quick, David, do you think in the world or in the U.S.?
What do you mean?
When Wade said expert in the world.
I'll tell you, I want the galaxy. Give me the galaxy, okay? Like, why stop just best in the world, okay?
All right, there it is. Wade's just big in Japan. Outside of the U.S., he's just big in Japan. No, I couldn't help it, Wade. I saw that there, and it was just a softball down the middle.
Right. And most of us ski in Canada. That's where we have to make sure we broaden beyond just these borders of the contiguous U.S. But David, what we have been talking about recently is budgeting for retirement. And I explained it in terms of, and this is where it's motivated by the smile, but, nobody knows how their spending is going to evolve in retirement, and so it's a matter of doing some guesswork around that. Most people probably will reduce at least discretionary types of spending as they age. Healthcare can come into the mix there. But could you tell us about the research you did looking at actual households to try to inform this kind of conversation around when I'm planning for my retirement and I don't really know what's going to happen with my spending, especially in my 80s and so forth? What does the data suggest might be a reasonable starting point for that?
Sure. So, if we go back, this is about a decade old. There's actually quite a bit in this space. And the point that I kind of always make is that retirement is the most expensive purchase most households ever make, right? It's a lot more expensive than a home, than a car, than your fancy new, iPad, whatever. So it really is important to get it right. And I think that, too many advisors in this space focus a lot on the asset part of the equation. They build really efficient portfolios. They have, capital market assumptions or CMAs for 50 asset classes, all this stuff. And then I'm just going to assume that you retire and your spending goes up every year by inflation. Well, it's a little bit more complicated than that, right? And, obviously, everyone is different. You have to kind of start with that in mind, but you can ask yourself, well, what differences do you see in reality, looking at empirical data versus what we commonly assume in financial plans? And, one kind of common assumption, especially in research for the last 30 plus years, is that retirees increase their consumption or spending every year in retirement by inflation. So what this means literally is that if the CPI went up 3.2% last year, that every single client out there calls up their advisor and says, hey, CPI was up last year by 3.2%, I need a raise. Or I think what a better way to think about it, well, what do actually people do over time? And you can use different data sets to look at this. And, kind of the most common one used is what's called a health and retirement study. And there's now at least I would say, 10 plus, probably more than that, papers looking at, how the same household evolves their spending over time. And there's kind of overwhelming evidence to suggest that individuals don't increase their spending every year by inflation. They tend to reduce it a little bit. So, for example, if inflation is, say, 3% a year on average, a household might increase their spending by 1% a year. So that total amount spent is actually decreasing in real terms as someone moves through retirement. Now, it gets kind of tricky as you get older. And this is based upon whether you like the average or the median. The median person continues to see this decline on average. The problem is, though, the average person tends to see an increase at later ages because there are a few folks that have kind of significant health expenses. And so I think, to me, the takeaway is just that when you're thinking about retirement spending, it really isn't as simple as assuming that it goes up every year by inflation. Advisors will say, well, so what? And I say, so what? Because it might free up money that they can use when they're younger and more active to go on vacations or use more effectively. So I think that kind of rethinking this decision around we have to assume that spending increases by inflation is really overly simplistic and doesn't match reality.
Right, and more to that point, the 4% rule idea has that assumption that you do increase spending for inflation every year. And I think one of the points you made with the Spending Smile article is that that's going to require a much bigger pot of assets to fund the retirement than otherwise. And you have some estimates around kind of... So to be clear also what the Spending Smile is, it's spending tends to decline from your retirement point until your mid-80s. And so you're coming down with a smile, and then you work your way back up again later in retirement, but may never really surpass or may get close to that initial starting point in, say, your mid-90s and so forth because of health-related or long-term care-related expenses. But it's a much less pot of assets to get that retirement with the Spending Smile, right?
Well, to me, and again, that's why it's so important. It's it's shifting consumption to some extent. It's saying, hey, you don't have to assume that you're going to increase your spending every year by inflation. You can actually you either need less to retire, you can save less for retirement, or you can spend more when you first retire. So I think that what it helps retirees think about is how they can reshift their consumption. Now, there are important nuances there, right? So the smaller your overall retirement income goal, the less declines you tend to see, right? So if you're spending, say, like $25,000 a year, that tends to go down less than if you're spending, say, $100,000 a year. And that should be somewhat intuitive because individuals who are spending more, consuming more, are usually spending more on discretionary items. They can choose to cut back, and they tend to do so, assuming they can.
It's, I mean, in a funny sort of way, I think, do you think there's some thought process behind this in terms of, people get caught up with what's the minimum sustainable withdrawal or maximum sustainable withdrawal rate. Not being aware of this spending smile, I get the sense that you're saying, and I get it, but I just want to say it for our listenership, people tend to kind of not spend enough during retirement. They underspend, hence the quality of life isn't what they should be if they don't know that this is a pattern that's most likely than not. Is that a correct statement?
Well, yeah. So what ends up happening, right, is you're spending less at 65 because you think you're going to spend more when you're 85, and so you're effectively under consuming, right? And there's really interesting nuances here when you get to the more kind of modeling aspect of things. So think about so you have assets and liabilities, right? So assets are your savings, it's your guaranteed income. The liability is your goal. Well, virtually every American receives some form of guaranteed lifetime income benefit, like Social Security. That is increased annually by inflation. So it very well could be that all the inflation adjustments that you need in retirement, you'll get from Social Security. And all of a sudden, then this kind of, withdrawal amount you need from your portfolio is more nominal in nature than real. So if you're not increasing the withdrawal from your portfolio, the target by inflation, all of a sudden this notion of, the 4% rule, it's built around this idea of I need money increased every year by inflation. So, a 4% real initial withdrawal rate is equivalent about to a 5% initial nominal withdrawal.
Yeah,
so
exactly.
You can take out more from your portfolio because you don't need it to fund the same type of spending, especially as you move through retirement.
I agree, and may the financial planning gods strike me down with the bolt of lightning through this window. But I think it's absolute idiocy. This kind of rigmarole around 4% is the right rule, 3.98% is the right amount, 3.85 is the right amount, and they do this year after year after year. Whereas if they've given any contemplation towards what will spending look like, if they gave half as much effort on what will spending look like as opposed to what the right sustainable withdrawal rate is, I think people would be in a much better place longer term.
Well, so there's different, it's really interesting if you think about retiree consumption. So, if you take like a first level perspective on retiree spending, what you would see is that, healthcare costs, as everyone knows, are a rising component of retiree spending. So if you look at data from the Consumer Expenditure Survey, about 10% of retiree budgets go to healthcare at age 65. It's about 20% at age 85. And so right there, someone would say, well, David, healthcare is a rising component of spending. Everyone knows that healthcare costs have risen faster than general inflation. So you would say, well, actually, David, I need to assume that the inflation rate for the retiree goal should be more than inflation. right? So if I would say, oh well, if inflation's 2%, I got to assume it's a 3% rate because healthcare is this larger rising component. Well, the thing is that it is true that healthcare is a rising component of overall expenditures, but it's everything else that people can spend money on that they spend less on. And so I think one thing that worries me is there's what's called the CPIE, right? The CPI for the elderly. And if you don't think about not just what people spend money on, but how they spend, you could actually reach the totally wrong conclusion about what inflation rate to use, because people just don't. They just actively choose to spend less as they move through retirement. And this effect is true even for folks who are overfunded. So some people say, well, oh, David, you find this effect because everyone is going to go broke. And no, if you isolate those households in the HRS that have like tons of money, they still reduce their consumption in real terms as well. So I think that it's not just, it's not because people have to spend less, they're just choosing to because they value different things as they move through retirement.
No, when you control for wealth, you see a reduced spending because, the obvious thing is physical activity, right? Okay, healthcare is up, but you're not pickleball, you're playing it less. I don't know, I'm just making something up, but there's an offset in terms of what you can do anyways on the discretionary side.
Right, and I think put some numbers around that.
Go ahead, wait.
Well, just like the spending smile pattern that you described, you put equations behind it for like the person who spends $100,000. I plugged that into that 4% rule style analysis once and found that 4% rule would be a 4.7% rule based on this idea that you're not going to have spending grow for inflation. It's going to decrease and then eventually come back up. But that led to 15% less assets for retirement. So just to put a little context around what exactly, this is not insignificant what we're talking about here, but sorry to interrupt you there.
It's fine. Yeah, and the one interesting kind of nuance with that analysis is that, for those of you that are, quants out there, it's based upon a regression. And, an issue with regressions at older ages is it kind of, the outliers come into play. And so there is the kind of tick up that you see with the average, but you don't see that with the median. Like median healthcare costs aren't that significant for the median person who gets older, but there is a very real chance for folks that live a long time, you could have a significant health expense. And so there's kind of some unique nuances about the tail that don't exist with kind of the earlier part of retirement, where there just is this collective reduction in expenses on average for the vast majority of retirees.
And just to be clear, just real quick, wait, just average is the average, right? Median, do you want to explain to folks, just in case they're non-advisors, we do have card number. Median is the number in the middle, but maybe you have a set response for what a median is.
There's three of us on today's podcast. I make $1 a year. Alex makes $100 a year. Wade makes $1,000 a year. Okay, so
Wade makes more than that. Relatively speaking.
Okay, and so then the key, right? So you have $1, 100, and 1,000. Like if I add those up, like the average is what? Like I don't know, like $300. Okay, the median though, the middle person's only 100. And so the problem is, the word to use is with averages is that outliers can really affect what the result is. And so when you run like regressions or build models, like those are often focused more on the outliers. So that tail you see in like the spending smile, it's being driven by, some individuals that do have these significant medical expenses. The average retiree isn't going to experience those. However, the average retiree does reduce consumption collectively as you move through retirement. There's just kind of nuances in terms of how you look at retiree cohorts.
Yeah, I will say this, though. Wade and Elon Musk average about a net worth of $100 billion. Just wanted to put it. Sorry, Wade. I couldn't help it.
No, but this point about, well, yeah, absolutely. So you've got, sometimes people may spend years in a nursing home, 100,000 plus a year. That's going to pull up that average in a way that helps create that smile. But so we don't plan for the average situation usually. Do you have any sort of sense when you were looking at the data of what percentage of the population may never really see that uptick in spending versus for those who do experience that uptick in spending, is the assumption of constant inflation-adjusted spending closer to what they might experience, or is it worse?
That's a good
more
question,
than that,
Wade.
less than that?
So here's where things get
I don't know how much that.
Okay, so the probability of experiencing significant health expenses increases you age, right? Americans collectively, especially wealthy Americans, are living longer. And so when you do research, there's this question of like, well, how relevant is it for individuals today who are 65 who could be alive like 30 years from now, right? So, while it's true that, only a minority experience health shocks, what also tends to happen, though, when you experience a health shock is that you tend to reduce your consumption afterwards. So in some other research, what I looked at is if you experience a health shock, how does that relate to future consumption? And it shouldn't be a surprise, right? Usually if something happens where you experience a health shock, you spend less afterwards. Again, there's this kind of effect where is it because of active choice or because you have to? And if you isolate household wealth, people still tend to spend less over time. So, I don't know the answer to what the percentage is, especially in the context of when you forecast improvement in mortality. But I do think that, to me, the takeaway is not so much to worry about, that ultimate tail risk. It's just in a base financial plan. Don't assume the retiree is going to increase spending every year by inflation. Maybe assume it's 1% less than inflation or 2% less, just to kind of better calibrate what spending is going to look like on average.
But not every year. You mean in certain yearly windows?
Every year. So if you
Reduce
assume
it.
inflation is 3% a year,
Okay.
you should assume the retiree spending goal increases every year by, say, 1% to better track how that's likely to evolve over time.
Okay, and you would do that as opposed to I'm making it up now, so I could be off. The first 10 years, let's add this inflation rate. The middle 10 years, let's add this inflation rate. And the end, let's add this. I'm kind of thinking in my head to correspond with the expenses of a spending smile. You're saying, nah, just smooth it out. Do X minus 1 and call it a
I
day.
guess that 95% plus of listeners are just using inflation right now. So I like to do baby steps. It's not clear to me how
fair
tools can incorporate spending. The most important thing, right, is everyone's going to have a different retirement. These projections are a hot mess. If you assume retiree consumption rises by inflation, you are likely going to suggest someone spend less or a lot less when they're a younger retiree than if you just somehow incorporate this idea that spending will decline in real terms over time. So from my perspective, that's the most important thing. There's lots of ways to do it. But right now, the industry standard is to assume that spending is in real terms, not nominal or some combination. So to me, let's check that first box and then move on to more intricate ways of modeling how it will change over time.
Got you. Wait,
and when I'm explaining the concept,
go ahead, wait.
Just when I'm explaining the concept, and also because software may not allow different inflation rates to be used, I do like that idea of just thinking about it the go-go, slow-go, no-go type of years where maybe, okay, I'm going to assume the same kind of inflation-adjusted spending through age 75. Then, though it's hard to do this, I'm going to look through my categories of spending and assume, okay, I may travel less between ages 76 and 85. And so discreetly reduce spending at later ages rather than having that continual reduction. But I think ultimately, either way, it's moving towards the idea of we don't necessarily need to assume that if I'm traveling around the world in my 60s, I'm going to be doing the same sort of thing in my 80s. That's an area where I'll probably spend significantly less. And that's also true with other categories as well.
Yeah, so I really like the idea of that more granular matching, thinking about what are your expenditures and how they're going to evolve. So I think that is the best way to do it. I just don't know to what extent advisors, planners do that today and how it can be modeled in a lot of the more common planning.
And you're also making a point that if you're a consumer, baby step it, and just do X minus 1 on inflation, and that should get you there as well.
Yeah, I mean, for lack of better terms, there's a lot of kind of terrifying information about healthcare costs. There's the stats that healthcare is going to cost, $400,000 a year. Well, you can do the same thing for all of your spending. You can do that for your transportation, your food. We don't do that. And those pieces are going to evolve as you move through time. But again, I just worry that as an industry, we spend so much time building perfect portfolios to the second decimal spot and just use very, very basic assumptions about the liability.
No, that was my point about if half the energy was spent on this, half as much of the energy was spent on this as opposed to what the right sustainable withdrawal rate is, I think we'd be having the right context of conversations with clients, frankly. So 100% agree. Another theme, Wade, I don't know if you picked up on this, and David, previously we had Michael Finke on, just talking about, the general, and Michael, Wade, and David are longtime collaborators on many research projects. And a theme that I picked up that he was saying, and Wade and I share this, is when you read a lot of these articles from journalists or from, the actual researchers, it's easy to get a sense of these draconian outlooks on retirement. But when I'm listening to Michael, when I'm listening to you right now, and Wade and I are just chit-chatting, I mean, the underlying theme in what we want to do is get people to actually spend as much as they can and live a fulfilled retirement. And I think that's important to say. I think that, the why, right? You don't want to get to retirement and then you're just getting by with the bare minimum. And I think you're reflecting that quite a bit. Am I off on that? Is that one of the pillars that guides your thinking in terms of the retirement spending? Is how can I get you to spend as much as you can to live this fulfilled retirement, as opposed to taking the other angle?
I mean, if I knew how long you're going to live, the returns of your portfolio, I could tell you exactly how much you have to save for retirement. Yeah. And so since we don't know that, we have to deal with uncertainty. And I think the problem is that we often focus on one type of risk, which is not being broke at some older age. And that's definitely a risk. I'm not going to say it's not. But, if you end up having like $1 bajillion at age 95 that you could have spent on the grandkids, on travel, then you didn't live your best retirement. So it really is a balancing act. And I think that, a lot of advisors, they run financial plans to age 105 with 98% success rates. Well, like that's absurd, right? Like what you're doing is you're trading, the likelihood of being broke at 95, which is now zero, for doing nothing when you can actually enjoy the money. So I think the key is a more balanced perspective. It's understanding what you want to spend, what are your assets, how do those match up, and then building a better overall retirement strategy.
And with the theme we're on today about with the retirement spending smile suggesting you can spend at a higher rate, another important factor that you've written about is if you have income sources from outside the portfolio that are going to last for your lifetime, such as Social Security benefits is one example, it's not necessarily catastrophic if you spend down your investment assets. And so that you find to be a really important factor that can allow someone to spend much more than the quote-unquote safe withdrawal rate. And so could you talk about that a little bit as well?
Yeah, I mean, that's why success rates are kind of a terrible metric to use in the grand scheme of things, right? I mean, because what they ignore is the magnitude of failure. So if I've got Social Security and pensions covering 90% of my goal, and if I just simply decompose my liability into needs and wants, so all of my needs are covered, most of my wants are covered, I've got a portfolio, you could spend 6 or 7%. Who cares? Go out, have fun, and adjust as you need to, right? When you ignore the fact that the portfolio is a marginal asset, its goal is to usually fund elastic spending, you can lead to very overly conservative estimates about, what are the implications if it does fail? So, I mean, I'm not saying that I actually still like 4% as a great starting point. The problem is that what you need to match it up against is what are your assets and liabilities, and what does it mean to truly fail? Well, in reality, people are going to make changes over time based upon how the market evolves, and they might adjust their withdrawal rates. Our tools don't account for that. Success rates don't account for magnitude of failure. I think there's just a host of issues today that lead to really some suboptimal recommendations from the vast majority of financial planning algorithms that are out there.
I think that's good, and I don't want to talk too much about this right now, Wade, because we're going to follow up with David in another episode about the planning tools that we can use for retirement income. But this is a good teaser about that. One thing I'd like to throw out there, and maybe we can conclude with something like this. Wade, we've been having the previous episodes have been about budgeting. What types of budgeting systems work best, and things along those lines, and how to budget for unexpected expenses, right? Which is kind of almost an oxymoron in and of itself. But based on what you've heard from David about, listen, there is though a pattern with regards to spending. From a practical standpoint, for folks that have been listening to the previous episodes, what do you recommend they should be doing as they budget for retirement with this sort of expectations? How do they incorporate David's research into their spending in retirement? Obviously, we said, hey, just add inflation and subtract a little bit. Wade, you were saying, you're more granular, in which, you're that 1% that David was referring to, where, match it year by year and have it reflect that spending smile. But what takeaway can someone have with this from a practical standpoint?
I think the takeaway would be how to construct the smile, the other half of that smile. So your kind of retirement spending without the healthcare shocks. You don't have a smile. You have you're smiling on one side, but it just goes down and never comes back up. So you have to think about what do you want to construct as that reasonable uptick in spending that you want to be prepared for. And that if you are prepared for that, you feel comfortable that you have sufficient assets for retirement. and therefore feel like you can go ahead and spend your money as you want. And so that's kind of the scenario, is what kind of uptick do you want to plan for? Is it 5 years in a nursing home, whatever the case may be? But also, David, as you're accounting for, and if you have some specific numbers on that, it'd be great to see, because otherwise it's just guesswork, that indeed someone moving to a nursing home is going to be spending quite a bit less on some of those other categories because, well, food would be provided through the nursing home cost and so forth. So there could be a dramatic reduction in other expenses. The only issue there, too, though, is when you layer in those high inflation rates on the long-term care, that can really dwarf any sort of offset you might get with other expenses that don't grow at such high inflation rates. But yeah, I mean, it's how do you construct that smile? And are you, for the most part, comfortable using the kind of suggestion coming out of the research, or is there another approach you might think about using for something like that?
Yeah, so again, I've got a low bar here. I think the number one thing, my advice for retirees, advisors, is just rethink the assumption that retiree spending is going to increase every year by inflation. Drop it by 1%, drop it by 2%. Maybe even use inflation as your base estimate for a plan. Run a second plan and show them, hey, this is a more realistic estimate. There's a lot of uncertainties about life, but if your spending kind of better tracks what we think will happen, this is how that main plan changes. I think that the idea is just to give people a better perception of what it's likely to look like. And again, I guess I'm less concerned today about exactly what that is, given the inflexibility of planning tools and just the wide usage today of inflation as the proxy for the benefit change.
Right. Yeah. Whatever
That's
you
a
do,
fair
you're
point.
moving in the
Right.
right direction, effectively.
Now, I'm listening to this podcast, and I'm a consumer, and I'm thinking, okay, inflation. We're sitting at, yes, obviously we want to make these podcasts evergreen, where someone listens to it 2 years from now, and it's not like, the hell are they talking about? But inflation is upward. It's crazy high right now. I think that's a scientific term. Wade uses it quite often. But no, there's 2 points I want to make. How should somebody be thinking about inflation based on what we're seeing now? Will it go back to a sort of range, if you will? And the other piece, and I heard this in a previous podcast you were in, David, as it relates to the portfolio. I'm going to throw in a wrinkle, a portfolio allocation of stocks and bonds. If there is this sort of, I think the word was super cycle, where in the 60s and so forth, interest rates went down. You kind of referred to, there was some study in England where over the last, 800 years? Did you go back that far? 800 years, ever since the Magna Carta was signed, interest rates have been going down. Something like that. Are we now on that upward trajectory? And what does that imply? Will that change the smile to that whatever? I just want to present it to you and you folks, talk about it a little
lot
bit
to
more.
unpack there.
Yeah. Well, we had a couple of minutes left, and I thought, let me throw this in there and see where it goes.
While it's true that inflation is defined as like the CPI weighted basket of goods is high, you need to understand like what's been high, like airline fuel, used car prices, motor oil. Those have been some of the biggest drivers of gas of inflation. And like healthcare expenses are only up about 3%. So sure, like the BLS definition of inflation has been high, but everyone's basket is different. And so I think that it is true that like if I'm renting a house in Miami, my rent has gone up 30%. If I'm a homeowner, then my expenses potentially haven't risen as much at all. If I'm not driving much, if I don't fly much. And so I think that inflation is a very real risk, but it's different for every person. But I do believe that like the nature of the efficient retirement portfolio is very different than the efficient accumulation portfolio. I think that the role of real assets are far more important for a retiree to the extent they need to hedge or they have unhedged inflation risk, right? Social Security is a pretty good hedge for inflation. It's hedged to the CPIW. To the extent that you want or need, other liabilities hedged to inflation, I believe in allocating more to real assets. So that's things like commodities. That's things like potentially real estate. There's TIPS. There's even I bonds. I think those are all viable strategies. I mean, your question about like long-term interest rates, gosh, I have no idea. That was it was Bank of England 800-year study. I would be surprised if we see rates permanently go back to where they've been. Like the long-term average yield on 10-year governments is about 5%. I don't think we'll get there, but we could, right? And so I think that the key, for most people is a high-quality diversified portfolio that's designed with their liability in mind. So, if you don't need as much inflation protection, you still have a different portfolio in retirement than accumulation. But there really is, I think, a value more for personalization in retirement than there maybe is in accumulation. I can try, but I wouldn't do a very good job.
No, that was great. Wade, anything on that one?
No, I think you covered it well, but you made the interesting point. Yeah, consumer price inflation now much higher than healthcare inflation. It kind of mixes up the algorithm behind the retirement spending smile. But this may just be an anomaly of what we're experiencing right now, and certainly it takes a while for the inflation numbers. Like every month we hear, oh, this month now the past year inflation's 10%. But that's incorporating 11 of the 12 months that you heard in the previous month's numbers. So that should help sort itself out over time. And there's no reason to expect inflation to remain at the levels we've seen over the past year.
I agree. Yep.
For the most part.
All right. Wade, you want to call it a day on this episode? And
sounds good. And as you alluded to earlier, we are excited to invite David back very soon for another episode. So thanks, everyone, for listening to Retire with Style. And we'll see you again next week. Thanks for listening.
See y'all.
Bye now.